American Baptist is a relatively simple thing. We're like most other Baptists. And yet, American Baptists have a long and storied and interesting legacy within the Christian tradition, specifically within the Baptist tradition. And so, in this video, my hope is to explore and explain in a few minutes, nothing too long or heavy, what it means to be an American Baptist in terms of theology and polity. That is how the church is run. So thank you for being here. I'm Reverend Nick Quince, or you can just call me Nick. I'm the pastor of First Baptist Church of Palos Verdes here in the South Bay area in Los Angeles. And being an American Baptist is an interesting thing for many reasons. One is when you tell someone that you're a pastor, they usually go, "Oh, cool." And if they're have some sort of background, they usually ask, "What kind of pastor?" And you're like, "Baptist." And then they kind of give you a look like, And then after that, you usually say, "But I'm American Baptist." And they're like, "Cool. And that means what exactly?" Right? And so an American Baptist, just a little bit of history, we essentially we became the Northern Baptist after we split from the Southern Baptist over a fairly minor issue called slavery. And we became the Northern Baptist Convention, and we kind of grew out of that, the American Baptist, and now we're called, I believe it's since 1972 or so, we became the American Baptist Churches USA, of which I've been licensed and ordained. And so we've been basically Baptist since there were Baptists, not quite as far back as John the Baptist, but we've been Baptist ever since Baptists have existed. We can trace kind of our lineage to that. And so that's just a bit of history. We have about 10 or so seminaries, specifically probably the most influential would be Northern Seminary, or at least of today, out in Chicago area. But we have a lot of seminaries back on the East Coast. American Baptists geographically are mostly confined's not the right word, but mostly found in the East Coast and the Midwest, although we do have a fairly strong contingent element out here in greater Los Angeles or the Pacific Southwest where I live. And so that's kind of who we are, at least at a historical level. Theologically, we're very similar to other Baptists. We believe in believer's baptism. That is the person, he or she, when they come of age and faith, and that can be fairly flexible. I have a 4-year-old son who is incredibly wise beyond his years. And if he came to me and said, "Dad, I want to be baptized," I'd be like, "Let's have the conversation, son." But we believe in believer's baptism upon a profession of faith. And we do not believe that baptism saves you in and of itself, but it is an outward sign of your allegiance and faith in Jesus Christ. And so your average, and I'm speaking for myself as an American Baptist. And this leads into another issue or facet of being an American Baptist, and that is we're Congregationalists, that we are autonomous churches who affiliate voluntarily with regions or the denomination. And so American Baptist churches are very diverse politically, theologically, racially, culturally, socioeconomically, and so on and so forth. So, for example, in my region, as a white dude, I am probably in the minority in terms of ordained ministers who serve. And so so that tells you whenever you go to an American Baptist church, each American Baptist church has a lot of autonomy, or what we call freedom. We believe in the priesthood of all believers, that every person has equal access to God. You don't have to go to a pastor to confess your sins or anything like that. So in that sense, we're not particularly Roman Catholic, and thus not particularly high church. We're far more, you might say, and this is not always the best word, but far more democratic with how we think and engage. Every person has a vote and one vote. The pastor doesn't have 10 votes. He or she has one vote if they vote at all. And so American Baptist churches, generally speaking, are autonomous, and they are engaged in kind of that sort of ministry. We have a long legacy of biblical social justice, so in that sense, we are fairly similar to the Methodist or the Wesleyan tradition. And so you can see kind of that sort of paradigm of church being kind of taught, or at least kind of seen a little bit. And because of that freedom of the local church to make their own decisions as it relates to polity or to theology or to practice, that leads to a lot of diversity. So out of all the mainline denominations, you have the PCUSA, the ELCA, the Episcopal Church, and the United Methodist Church, and so on. All of them would be considered theologically and there's always exceptions to this, but generally you would see a lot of theological liberalism or theological progressivism. It's not quite as simple in the American Baptist Churches USA. Out of all the mainline denominations, there are 7 of them. I believe there's 7, 6 or 7. We are the only one that has that is not what we call fully affirming, because again, we are autonomous local churches. So there are churches in my denomination that are affirming of LGBTQ issues and stuff like that. My church is not, as I am not. I'm traditional, or I don't like the phrase conservative, but I hold to what I believe to be a traditional sexual ethic as I find in Holy Scripture. And so that leads on that contentious debate. My church is conservative or traditional on that, but not every church is. And there are a lot of churches, for example, in Metro Chicagoland or New York area that are far more progressive. And there are some that are more moderate in figuring it out and stuff like that. But so you can see that freedom is amazing because it allows you to do kind of what you feel called to do by the Spirit. It gives you a lot of flexibility as it relates to doctrine and theology, although not to the fullest extent of that. But that also comes with a caveat, or what we might call pros and cons. The con is that you do have churches in the denomination which are very, very progressive. For example, when I went to a church in Evanston, Illinois, I walk in and this looks, there's pride flags everywhere. There's Buddhist stuff. There's New Age stuff. There's political, basically it looked like the front office of the DNC. So it was one of those, I'm like, it's not saying you can't be a Democrat and be a Baptist and vote or anything like that. But it was one of those, I walked in, I'm like, this is not a church, if that makes sense. This has become a front office for the DNC. And so there are those kinds of churches, and there are churches more like my church. And so on the contentious issues of our day theologically, there tends to be not a lot of Reformed theology in our denomination, but that's not to say there isn't any element of that or any people that hold to that. So we tend to be far more Arminian or free will Baptist in the kind of way we think. We tend to affirm the death of Christ as being for all people. That there's no one outside the scope of God's love and care for them, as we believe Christ died for everyone. So we hold the believer's baptism, the autonomy of the local church, generally Arminian, not exclusively so, of course. And we are diverse on the issue of sexual ethics. Specifically, you find a range in our churches. And that's why, while we are called the mainline denomination, and historically we are, it's not quite so simple. Some regions are more conservative than others, and some regions are more liberal than others. And so you can see a video on that question on my channel. I did one about a couple weeks ago. So if you're interested in that, just look for the appropriate thumbnail and you can watch that one. But the other issue that makes us distinct from, say, Southern Baptist and more what's often called conservative denominations, although I don't really like the phrase conservative. I know I've used it, but it's kind of just how the language is used, is that we do affirm the ordination of women. That is, called and gifted women can serve in any position of leadership in an American Baptist church. There are, of course, exceptions in terms of practice. Some churches do affirm women in ministry but aren't comfortable with it. Some are openly complementarian or patriarchal, depending on how that works out. But your average American Baptist church is not particularly ideologically complementarian. We tend to be fairly egalitarian in function and how we engage with one another. So we are egalitarian generally, and specifically that does have a lot of historical precedent where what would become the American Baptist Churches USA have ordained women for well over a century, before the fundamentalist controversy of the 1920s, Machen, Princeton, and all that sort of stuff. And so we've been ordaining women before there was that sort of liberalism, and these churches were in the Midwest. These are not these aren't churches that are bastions of liberalism. And so your average American Baptist is fairly egalitarian, although probably there are exceptions. Believes in believer's baptism, believes in the autonomy of the local church, probably does believe in spiritual gifts. So that we would be continuationist, but we tend to be fairly low-key at most of our churches. We're a little more laid back than, say, our Pentecostal brothers and sisters. We affirm believer's baptism, that when the person comes of faith and has the capacity to make a saving profession in Jesus Christ as their Lord, then they are baptized upon that. We also, of course, it goes without saying, we believe in the Trinity, the authority of Scripture. American Baptists tend not to be creedal. We tend not to like creeds. I'm personally okay with creeds. I think the Nicene Creed is kind of a helpful biblical summary of what it means to believe in Jesus and to be a Christian. But there is kind of because we believe in the priesthood of all believers and autonomy, and that is freedom of the human person to engage with God, to pray, and to have no mediator between them except except Jesus Christ. That does leave a lot of kind of don't tell me what to do in American Baptist churches. Now, we love debate. We get along really well together. We celebrate the Lord's Supper. We do all that, and we don't require you believe a certain way or vote a certain way on most things, but we do have a very strong individualized kind of understanding of what it means to be the church. And so that has its pros and has its cons. It can lead to kind of an identitarianism. That means we kind of become, it's very easy to become a country club, although that can happen in the PCUSA or the UMC or what have you. And so that's kind of what it means to be an American Baptist. We are generally egalitarian. We are believers. We believe in believers' baptism. We believe in the Lord's Supper. We hold to we're not particularly liturgical with that, although there are churches with liturgical elements, of course. But your average American Baptist church is not particularly liturgical or high church. And so we do require, generally speaking, seminary training for ministers and for those seeking to be ordained. Out of all of our seminaries, the one I find to be the most helpful and the most orthodox and the most rigorous in training is Northern Seminary out in Chicago. But we do have a presence at Fuller Seminary, and we do get a lot of ministers from across the spectrum of seminaries. The more mainline or progressive you get, the more you tend to go to the UCC seminaries or the PCUSA seminaries or what have you. And so our denomination is diverse, racially, politically, theologically, and you begin to find very quickly that you don't quite know what you're getting when you go to an American Baptist church. And so if you made it this far, let me tell you what would happen, for example, if you came to my church, which is the First Baptist Church of Palos Verdes, just near Torrance and Long Beach, for those of you who are living in Los Angeles, and we worship at 11 a.m. on Sunday mornings. You would be welcome. If you walk in, you will find a largely older congregation of seasoned Christians who love Jesus, who work together very well, that love new people. What makes our church as an American Baptist church distinctive is that we are conservative on the question of sexual ethics. Politically, we're fairly, you have some fairly conservative folks, you have some fairly moderate folks, but we're not a particularly hardcore partisan group. We do, generally speaking, seem to affirm women as pastors or as ministers. My wife is very well respected and treated well. While we're an older congregation, we love having kiddos around. My son, who's 4 years old, runs around the congregation doing all sorts of stuff, and they love it. We play the organ, and so we have classic hymns. We have a PowerPoint for folks, but we have hymns that we read and sing. I try to preach expositionally. We do a call and response. There's lots of standing and sitting because, we stand for worship, we stand for the doxology, and we do our tithes and offerings. And so it's a very low-key, very simple service that does focus on preaching, but also on exhortation and fellowship together after the service is done. And so that's kind of what it's like at our church. I don't know if any of you have had experiences in American Baptist churches, but while we are mainline, our disposition generally is fairly mixed. You have mainline, you have evangelical, and you have very progressive. And so my church, for those who are interested, would be considered neither fundamentalist nor liberal. We are what is often called evangelical in the best sense of the term, meaning we believe in the proclamation of the word, we believe in soul care, we believe in winning hearts and souls to Jesus, and we believe in discipleship and teaching. And so American Baptist churches tend to have a far more strong emphasis on education. We like our ministers and our laity to be educated. It doesn't mean you have to be seminary trained per se, but we really, that's something we view very strongly. So we're not as touched by, for example, the issues of dispensationalism or young earth creationism. It's not to say there aren't folks that hold to that or anything like that, but you mentioned 6-day creationism in American Baptist church, even the more conservative ones like mine, and people kind of just look at you and go, that's interesting. Like, It's just not that whole debate has kind of just missed us, if that makes sense. It just wasn't, it's not really a thing. My background, and I wasn't raised American Baptist, I was raised in Calvary Chapel, was very much about that. So when I went to an American Baptist church and discovered there wasn't all this pride flags over there and there wasn't all this fundamentalist stuff over there or what have you, and I was like, oh, this is fairly normal, fairly low key, and fairly just genuine. Like, the buildings tend to be fairly nice. We tend to like our old buildings, but we love the organ. And there's something about simple worship leading to simple faith that causes us to live simple lives of holiness. And so if that's of interest to you, you're welcome to the First Baptist Church of Palos Verdes. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe, share, leave a comment. But yeah, what's your experience in the American Baptist Churches USA? Let me know. I'm really curious, because as someone who became American Baptist when I met my wife, or my girlfriend at the time, back in an undergrad, it was a whole new experience. There was a generosity there, theologically and politically, that wasn't in my background. And we are generally a fairly hospitable denomination. And I think my church exemplifies that because, they've welcomed me, and they're just very, very kind people. And so thank you for watching. I'm Nick, and this is the New Testament Theologist YouTube channel, where we seek to glorify God through the use of our minds and through the preaching of the word and through teaching especially. So God bless you, and I will see you next time. And if I'm so blessed by it, see you on Sunday. God bless.